Welcome back to Klepper's Corner. Today in history. June 7th is one of those dates where humanity tries to look organized while quietly setting the curtains on fire. Today we get sacred Roman housework, holy wars with bad logistics, maps carved by guesswork, train cars exposing legal cruelty, and institutions learning that warning signs are not decorative. Segment 1, and sacred fires, royal receipts, and the theater of power. Ancient Rome opened the Vestalia on June 7th, inviting women into the inner sanctuary of Vesta, where the eternal flame represented not just a goddess, but Rome's preferred self-image. Permanent, pure, and absolutely not one donkey bray away from chaos. The Vestal virgins had rare privileges, including property rights and social authority, which sounds impressive until the job also includes keep the state flame lit or face terrifying punishment. Rome turned domestic ritual into national security, proving empires love making private life public policy, especially when they can blame women for the furnace. The festival even shut down courts and marriages until the temple was cleaned, a reminder that bureaucracy has always been one mop bucket from crisis. Then, in 1628, King Charles I ratified the Petition of Right after Parliament explained that taxation without consent, random imprisonment, forced quartering, and martial law were less divine monarchy and more landlord with the crown. Charles agreed because he needed money, then treated the agreement like terms and conditions he had clicked past. And in 1654, Louis XIV was crowned after surviving the Fronde, learning that if nobles scare you, build Versailles and make them compete over who gets to hand you a napkin. Power kept dressing control in ritual, government by incense, parchment, and very expensive lighting. Segment 2, and holy cities, brave hearts, and the world's worst property survey. On June 7th, 1099, the First Crusade reached Jerusalem after years of starvation, disease, desertion, and the medieval travel package historians call character building. The Crusaders arrived with a fraction of their original force, facing poisoned wells and a Fatimid defense that removed nearby trees so thoroughly the attackers had to siege a city after visiting the world's least helpful lumberyard. The siege ended weeks later with the capture of Jerusalem and horrific massacre, followed by centuries of religious warfare and diplomacy at sword point. Then, in 1329, Robert the Bruce died after securing Scottish independence and left one of history's most metal estate plans. Remove my heart, put it in a silver casket, and carry it into battle. Sir James Douglas tried to honor that vow in Spain and, according to tradition, hurled the casket into battle before dying himself. That is loyalty, but also a reminder to read the fine print before agreeing to handle a friend's remains. And in 1494, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, dividing the unmapped world with a line west of Cape Verde, despite not understanding the Americas or the millions already living there. It was colonialism with the confidence of a group project nobody researched. People kept mistaking sacred purpose for permission, whether storming walls, carrying hearts, or slicing the planet like cake at a party where none of the actual guests were invited. Segment 3, and train cars, cold platforms, and the privacy police. On June 7, 1892, Homer Plessy boarded a whites-only rail car in New Orleans with a first-class ticket and a deliberate legal strategy. Plessy, 7/8 European and 1/8 African by the racial arithmetic of the time, exposed segregation's cruelty by sitting where the law said his body became a problem. His arrest led to Plessy versus Ferguson, where the Supreme Court blessed separate but equal, a phrase with all the honesty of some assembly required on a box missing the wheels. The railroad helped the challenge, not because executives discovered justice, but because separate cars were expensive. Capitalism looked at Jim Crow and said, "We object," mainly to the maintenance cost. Exactly 1 year later, Mohandas Gandhi was thrown off a train at Pietermaritzburg in South Africa, despite holding a valid first-class ticket. He spent the freezing night in a dark waiting room, deciding whether to go home or fight. And that humiliation helped push him toward organized resistance, and eventually Satyagraha. Then, in 1965, Griswold versus Connecticut struck down a law banning contraception even for married couples, because Connecticut had once decided the marital bedroom needed a legislative hall monitor. Across these stories, authority policed seats, bodies, movement, intimacy, and dignity. It kept asking the same question in different uniforms. How much of your life can we regulate before you notice the ticket says first class? Segment 4 and microstates, plastic empires, cricket whites, and the artist formerly known as corporate property. On June 7th, 1929, Vatican City became a sovereign state, resolving the Roman question after popes spent nearly 60 years calling themselves prisoners of the Vatican. A dramatic phrase when your prison contains priceless art, Renaissance guards, and better real estate than most governments. The Lateran Treaty gave the Pope a tiny country and diplomatic freedom outside direct Italian control, brokered by Benito Mussolini, who discovered Catholic support was useful when building a dictatorship. Nothing says spiritual reconciliation like fascism doing coalition outreach. Then, in 1968, the first Legoland opened in Billund, Denmark, after the Lego factory was overrun by fans wanting to see brick models. What began as a display garden became an empire of plastic imagination, proving that if enough children step on the product barefoot, it becomes culture. In 1975, the first Cricket World Cup dragged cricket toward television and speed, forcing traditionalists to watch a sport famous for 5-day matches discover ending in 1 day. And in 1993, Prince changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol during a war with Warner Brothers, making himself impossible to market on the label's terms. From Vatican sovereignty to Lego tourism, cricket's reinvention and Prince's symbol, institutions keep trying to own identity, while identity finds a smaller country, a brighter brick, a faster format, or a name your lawyer cannot pronounce. Segment 5 and warnings ignored, warnings weaponized, and the exact time the floor disappeared. Some June 7th stories are not about authority claiming control, but about reality filing an appeal. In 1692, Port Royal, Jamaica, the so-called wickedest city in the world, was hit by a massive earthquake and tsunami. Built on a fragile sand spit, the pirate-rich port liquefied beneath its own confidence, and 2/3 of the city sank into the sea. A pocket watch, later recovered from the underwater ruins, had stopped at 11:43, giving disaster the one thing bureaucracy loves most: a timestamp. In 1981, Israel launched Operation Opera, sending fighter jets on a low-flying raid to destroy Iraq's Osirak nuclear reactor. The world condemned it publicly, while many governments privately exhaled, because diplomacy often works like a group text, where the real conversation is in a different chat. The strike helped define the terrifying logic of stopping a future catastrophe by creating a present explosion. In 1989, Suriname Airways Flight 764 crashed near Paramaribo after pilots ignored warnings and used systems improperly, killing 176 people. And in 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines, previewing a larger blast that would cool the planet and bury communities when a typhoon turned volcanic debris into concrete soup. Whether it was sand, radar, cockpit alarms, or seismic tremors, the message was the same. Warnings are not vibes. Ignore enough of them, and history stops being a lecture and becomes debris removal. In conclusion, June 7th gives us a pretty efficient tour of human behavior. Sanctify control, overreach with confidence, draw lines on places you do not understand, police people until they resist, and then act shocked when nature or consequence shows up with receipts. Civilization is a group project where half the team brings laws, half brings ladders, and one donkey occasionally saves the whole operation.